An independent journalist receives a mysterious letter about a forgotten village in the United States. As she investigates, she discovers that no one who visits the place can leave. Each chapter reveals a new layer of terror, conspiracy, and unexplained phenomena. And the closer she gets to the truth, the harder it becomes to escape. It started with a letter, no return address, no sender's name, just a torn envelope stained like it had been buried, with a message written in frantic handwriting. Don't go back there, not even to remember. For journalist Claire Whitmore, it wasn't just a warning, it was a trigger. Her brother, Elijah, vanished 12 years ago during a hiking trip in the Appalachian region. No body, no trace, just his camera, recovered weeks later, with the final frame showing an empty village road and a clock stuck at 3:19 p.m. Since then, Claire had buried that part of her life deep, until now. She tried to forget the woods, the search teams, the false leads, the sleepless nights. But the handwriting in the letter looked familiar. Not identical to Elijah's, but close enough to twist her stomach into knots. The paper smelled faintly of pine and smoke, and she couldn't explain why, but the second she touched it, she heard something, a low hum. At first, she thought it was the refrigerator, but the hum didn't stop. It seemed to vibrate inside her bones, a sound she hadn't heard since the week Elijah disappeared. That same week, the clocks in her parents' home stopped at exactly 3:19. Claire had left journalism years ago, burned out and broken. But that letter dragged her back into the fire. She drove 6 hours to visit her parents and rummaged through the old boxes in the attic, hunting for anything tied to Elijah. She found his field journal, some undeveloped rolls of film, and a folded brochure. Welcome to Dower, North Carolina, a town stuck in time. She didn't remember him ever mentioning Dower. It wasn't on any of the official maps of his last trip. That made it worse. She scanned the internet. Nothing, no records, no GPS pin, as if the town had never existed. But she had already made up her mind. She wasn't just going to write an article. She was going to find out what really happened to Elijah. If Dower was real, if this town still existed, she would find it, and maybe, just maybe, bring back something more than a memory. What she didn't know was this: Dower doesn't let anyone leave once they arrive, and the letter wasn't meant to warn her. It was meant to stop her. Claire didn't sleep that night. The name Dower looped endlessly in her mind, like a whisper she couldn't silence. At 3:19 a.m., her laptop screen flickered just once, and a strange pop-up appeared. "Did you forget something?" She blinked. The window was gone. No trace in her history, no malware detected. Shaking it off, she returned to Elijah's old field journal, flipping through pages filled with sketches of trees, strange symbols and coordinates scrawled in the margins. One set was circled 3 times in red ink: 35.3971 degran N, 82.5486 degran W. She typed them into 3 different GPS systems. Nothing. The coordinates simply didn't exist. But Claire wasn't one to give up easily. Using topographic overlays and archived satellite imagery, she traced the general area, a thick patch of unmarked forest in western North Carolina. The trees there looked wrong. They seemed too symmetrical from above, as if planted in a pattern, forming a shape she couldn't quite identify. She reached out to a geologist friend, Dr. Ray Marks, who confirmed that the region was classified as a signal void, a dead zone for electronic devices. "There's no reason for that in a natural forest," he said, "unless something's interfering with the signals on purpose." Despite the growing unease, Claire rented a jeep, packed a camera, a drone, and 3 notebooks. As a precaution, she sent her assistant Josh a full itinerary with timestamps and a check-in schedule. Josh, skeptical but loyal, agreed to monitor her progress. "If I don't hear from you by midnight on the third day," he said, "I'm coming after you, with cops and dogs." Claire laughed, but the tension in her chest didn't fade. Before leaving, she opened the letter one more time and found something she hadn't noticed before. An old Polaroid tucked behind the fold, showing a blurry street sign with one word: Dower. The sky in the photo was unnaturally dark. On the back of the Polaroid, written in trembling ink, was a question: "Do you remember the noise?" Claire didn't understand what it meant until she realized her ears were ringing again. That same low hum, just like before. But this time, it was louder, and it was coming from inside the attic. She turned slowly toward the shadows behind the boxes, heart hammering. The hum stopped instantly, and when she stepped forward with her flashlight, everything went dead. The light, the air, the sound, like the house itself had taken a breath and decided to wait. Claire reached the general area just before sunset. The GPS cut out 20 minutes into the drive, forcing her to rely on printed maps and Elijah's old notes. As she ventured deeper into the Blue Ridge region, paved roads gave way to gravel, then to dirt. Locals in the last town she passed, Morgantown, refused to talk when she asked about Dower. One man at the gas station paled when she showed him the Polaroid. "Turn around," he muttered. "No one comes back from there." But Claire had already passed the point of return. The last thing she saw before the woods swallowed her was a sign half covered in ivy: "Do not follow the silence." The deeper she drove, the more time seemed to warp. Her watch froze at 3:19 p.m. Again, shadows grew longer, even though the sun hadn't moved. The trees pressed inward, as if trying to close off the path behind her. Then, as she rounded a sharp bend, a road appeared that wasn't on any map. It was perfectly paved, freshly laid, with no signs of wear or weather. Claire stopped the jeep, heart racing. There were no signs, no markings, just a single wooden post with the word Dower carved into it, freshly painted, the red paint still dripping. And then she noticed something worse. Her car radio, long dead, suddenly clicked on and played a recording of her own voice whispering, "Don't go back." The road ahead seemed to vibrate, like heat waves rising from asphalt. But the air was cold. Too cold. Claire stepped out, testing the pavement with her boot. Solid. Still, her instincts screamed at her to turn around. She snapped a photo and sent it to Josh. No signal. She launched her drone to survey the area, but it crashed instantly, the feed turning to static after 5 seconds. As she approached the wooden post to inspect it closer, she noticed something carved beneath the word Dower. A time, 3:19, and a single word: listen. Claire stood there in the middle of the road, surrounded by dense trees that were now completely silent. No birds, no wind, just the sound of her own breath. And then came the hum again, low, steady, and directional. It was pulling her forward. She got back in the jeep and followed the impossible road. As the tires rolled forward, her phone restarted by itself, showing a new notification, one new voicemail. But when she played it, there was only static, until a voice, her brother's voice, whispered, "Why didn't you listen the first time?" Claire slammed on the brakes. Her headlights revealed something ahead, a town sign barely visible in the fog. Welcome to Dower. Population 0. The road ended at a rusted gate, and behind it, the air shimmered like a mirage. The gate creaked open with a gentle push, as if it had been waiting. Claire stepped through, her boots crunching on gravel that looked untouched for decades. The village ahead seemed suspended in another century. Victorian-style houses lined the empty street, their windows shattered or boarded shut. A post office, a diner, a clock tower, all coated in dust and overgrowth, yet everything was too intact. No animal tracks, no signs of natural decay, as if time had simply paused. The town sign had lied. It wasn't empty, not exactly. She felt it, eyes watching from somewhere just out of sight, behind curtains or shadows too still to be natural. At the center of town stood the clock tower, tall and rusted, its hands frozen at 3:19. Claire's breath caught. Every clock she found afterward, the diner wall, the post, office lobby, even a child's watch on a sidewalk, read the same time. 3:19. The number was everywhere, like a code etched into the town's DNA. She began filming, narrating softly into her mic, trying to make sense of it. As she moved past the diner, she noticed a stack of newspapers through the cracked window. The headline on everyone was identical. "Welcome back, Claire." The date? Tomorrow's. Claire broke into the diner through a broken window and sifted through the papers. Every copy carried the same strange detail. Her byline was printed beneath the title, but she hadn't written a word. The photo below the headline was of her, taken just minutes ago, from an angle no one could have captured. She froze. Behind the counter, an old radio flickered on. Static buzzed, then resolved into a song from her childhood, Elijah's favorite lullaby. Her throat tightened. The radio speaker crackled again. "Claire," a voice whispered, distorted but unmistakable. "Don't forget why you're here." The hum returned, now pulsing through the floorboards. Outside, the fog had thickened. Claire ran toward the clock tower, needing height to survey the town. As she climbed, she noticed photos pinned to the walls, snapshots of people in mid-scream, mid-run, mid-prayer. Each photo was labeled by date and time, all 3:19, all of them taken in Dower. At the top, she found a massive gear mechanism stopped cold, but on a ledge beside it lay something impossible, Elijah's necklace, the one he wore the day he vanished. It was warm to the touch. Claire turned to leave and found that the tower door had vanished. The room had no exit now, only the ticking of a clock that should have been broken. Claire didn't remember falling asleep inside the clock tower, but when she opened her eyes, the light filtering through the cracks was different, grayer, colder. The air smelled like iron and smoke. She scrambled down the stairs, heart pounding, only to find that the street outside had changed. The buildings were darker, older somehow. Windows that had been shattered were now sealed, but with something unsettling behind the glass. Faces, pale, still, staring. Men, women, children. None moved, none blinked. It was like they'd been captured mid-thought. Frozen photographs, dressed in faded 1940s clothes. Claire waved her hand in front of one window. The woman behind it smiled, but her eyes remained lifeless. The smile didn't fade. It stretched, slowly, unnaturally wide. Claire stumbled back, trembling. She turned to run and nearly collided with a man standing silently in the middle of the street. He hadn't been there before. He was tall, dressed in outdated work clothes, his skin almost translucent. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. His eyes didn't blink, not once. Claire stepped back, trying to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. The man turned his head toward the clock tower, then vanished. No footsteps, no sound, just gone. Claire blinked hard. When she opened her eyes again, the town was active, not lively, but moving, slowly. Figures walked the sidewalks, their motions robotic, like puppets on invisible strings. A child bounced a ball in place, rhythmically without blinking. A woman swept dust from a spotless porch, her eyes locked straight ahead. None of them acknowledged Claire, not even when she screamed. Then came the music. A soft, eerie piano melody playing from somewhere central, drawing her like gravity. She followed the sound to a community hall. Inside, Dozens of the residents sat in pews, watching a black and white film projected onto a crumbling wall. The screen showed Claire arriving in town, entering buildings, touching Elijah's necklace. Footage she never recorded. Claire tried to leave, but the front door was now gone. Only the humming remained, louder here, closer, vibrating in her teeth. The film on the wall flickered violently, and for a split second she saw something else. Elijah tied to a chair in a basement, mouth gagged, eyes wide with terror, and behind him a mirror. Inside the mirror was Claire. She screamed, but the townspeople turned in unison, all facing her, all unblinking. One voice echoed from the projector. "You're not watching the town, Claire. The town is watching you." And suddenly the screen went dark, and the humming stopped. Claire backed away from the now silent projector room, heart pounding so loudly it masked every other sound, until she heard it. A thud beneath her feet, then another. Rhythmic, deliberate, as if someone or something was pacing directly under the floor. She pressed her ear to the wooden planks. A whisper seeped through. "You're late." The voice was hoarse, cracked, unmistakably human. Another whisper followed. "She's almost ready." Claire stood abruptly, disoriented. There had to be a basement, but there were no stairs, no door, only dust-covered pews and walls that seemed to grow tighter the longer she stayed. She searched the perimeter, knocking on walls, looking for a loose panel or hollow echo. One section behind the altar sounded different, deeper, as if the wall concealed something. She pressed her palms against it, cold, slick. She dug her nails into a seam she could barely see, and the wood gave way like wet paper. A narrow passage opened into pure blackness, the air immediately colder and thicker. Claire descended slowly, flashlight shaking in her hand. The whispers grew louder, but not clearer. They overlapped in a loop, murmured prayers, pleading, counting. One voice stood out. It repeated the same word, awake. The basement was no ordinary cellar. The walls were lined with shelves of photographs, each labeled with names and dates, all at 3:19. Claire scanned them and froze. Her own picture was already there. Today's date, same clothes, same expression. It hadn't been taken yet. Behind her, a door slammed shut. She spun, flashlight beam darting wildly. The floor beneath her shifted, creaked, groaned, and then she saw them, eyes in the cracks of the floorboards, watching, not blinking, not even human. Claire tried to back away, but her feet stuck slightly, like something beneath was pulling. She dropped her flashlight. It flickered and went out. In the pitch dark, the voices surged, speaking now in sync. "The town remembers. The town rewinds." Claire screamed, clawing at the walls, until her fingers found a latch. She pulled with all her strength. A section of the wall crumbled inward, revealing another room, this one circular, stone-lined, with a single object in the center, a rotary phone ringing. Claire hesitated. The ringing wouldn't stop. No wires connected it to anything. The air buzzed as she picked it up. Silence. Then a voice, Elijah's, breathing heavily, whispered, "It doesn't let you go, not even after you're dead." The line went dead, but the phone kept ringing. Claire fled the basement, climbing through debris and splinters until she burst out the side of the community hall. Night had fallen, though she swore it had been midday only minutes ago. The streets were now dimly lit by flickering gas lamps. Figures stood at corners, motionless, like statues waiting for some unseen signal. The silence was unbearable, so complete it rang in her ears. Then, as if on cue, a music box began to play. A child's melody, simple, repetitive, but broken. One note was off-key, like a scream masked as a song. From the shadows, a voice called out cheerfully, "Come play with us, Claire." She turned and saw a group of children standing in a perfect circle, Each wore identical white clothes, their faces smudged with ash or dust. One girl stepped forward, holding a tattered red ball. "Do you remember the rules?" the girl asked, head tilted. Claire shook her head, frozen. "Tag," another child whispered, "but you can't run until the bell rings." Claire stared, confused, until a distant church bell chimed once. The children scattered instantly, some into houses, some vanishing behind trees, some simply blinking out of sight. Claire stood alone. Then she felt it. Footsteps behind her, slow, deliberate, coming closer. She ran, not because she believed in the game, but because her instincts screamed that whatever had been it was hunting now. As she turned corners and sprinted through alleys, she realized something terrifying. The town was reshaping. Roads she'd just taken no longer existed. Paths doubled back on themselves. The buildings moved, shifting subtly, like a maze adjusting to her panic. Every time she looked back, the space behind her was different. A house that hadn't been there before, a door that had never opened. Her lungs burned, but she didn't stop until she hit a wall that hadn't been there seconds ago. She collapsed to her knees, breathless, and looked up. Across from her stood the children, now in a perfect line. The girl with the red ball stepped forward again. "You lost," she said softly. The ball rolled toward Claire and stopped at her feet. It had her name written on it. In her own handwriting, she picked it up and turned it over. Carved into its surface were the words, "Your turn." The music box stopped. Everything went silent again. From the shadows, the humming returned, sharper now, more urgent. And with it, a chorus of whispers, "Don't stop playing. If you stop playing, you stay." Claire wandered back toward the residential edge of Dower, her legs shaky, her breath ragged. Every house she passed looked abandoned, yet meticulously preserved, like museum exhibits, of lives that were never lived. She chose one at random, a pale blue two-story home with a porch swing that moved despite the still air. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the house was spotless. Furniture was arranged neatly. A fire burned in the hearth, but no one was there. On the wall above the mantel hung a mirror, old, cracked, and strangely dark. Claire moved toward it, compelled, as if the glass itself called her by name. When she looked into it, her reflection didn't match her movements. It stared back at her, expressionless, still, then slowly tilted its head in the opposite direction. Claire stepped back in terror. Behind the glass, something shifted. Not her, not a reflection, a room, another version of the same house. In it, a figure stood with its back turned, tall, motionless, wearing the same clothes Elijah had worn in his last photo. The figure began to turn. Claire's heart stopped. Before his face could be revealed, the mirror cracked violently from the inside. Blood leaked from the fractures. The hum returned, louder than ever. Claire spun around. The house was no longer pristine. The furniture had rotted. Mold crawled up the walls. The fire had turned cold, leaving behind ash and bone. The door she entered was gone, replaced by a solid wall. In a panic, she tried the staircase. As she reached the second floor, every mirror in the hallway turned black. She caught glimpses of movement inside them, people trapped on the other side, banging, screaming, silently. One of them was her. She stared at the mirror, frozen in fear, and her reflection screamed without sound, mouthing words over and over. "Don't answer. Don't let them in." Then came the knock. A soft, polite knock at the front door that no longer existed. Claire backed into a corner, heart hammering. The knocking grew louder, more insistent, until it sounded like fists pounding from all sides. Mirrors shattered one by one. Whispers filled the air. "We saw you come. Now you see us." Claire found a crawl space in the closet and forced herself inside, clutching her recorder. Just before the door closed, she saw one last thing in the mirror across the hall. a live feed of herself, hiding, watching herself be watched, and in the corner of that reflection, something was crawling toward her. Claire escaped the house just before sunrise, or what she thought was sunrise. The sky glowed, but the sun never appeared. It was as if Dower had its own version of light, dim and perpetual, like a world caught between day and night. She wandered toward what looked like a communications building on the outskirts of town, an old radio station with a half-broken tower leaning dangerously to one side. The front door was wide open. Dust covered the floor, but the air was warm and electric. Inside, equipment buzzed with static. On the wall, a red "Live" sign was glowing faintly. The station was broadcasting. Curious and desperate, Claire approached the control board. Every dial was already set, every channel live. A single microphone stood in the center. She leaned in. Before she could speak, a voice crackled through the old speakers, her own, recorded earlier that day. "If you're hearing this, I'm already part of it. They don't let you leave, not even in pieces." The message looped over and over. Claire didn't remember recording it, but her voice was unmistakable. She searched for a way to shut off the transmission, but the power cords led into the floor, disappearing. Beneath rusted panels, the station had no power supply, yet it was still on. Behind her, a screen flickered on. Grainy black and white footage showed the streets of Dower, live, from above. Drones, hidden cameras. Claire watched herself appear in frame, standing outside the radio station right now. She wasn't alone. In the background, silhouettes began to gather. Figures with no faces, only static where features should be. She turned to the window. Nothing was there, yet the broadcast showed them. Coming closer, one of them raised its hand and pointed directly at the camera. The screen cut to black, then text appeared, one word at a time. "We are still listening." The red "Live" sign blinked faster. A drawer in the console slid open by itself. Inside, Claire found a reel labeled "Final Transmission." Her hands trembled as she loaded it into the player. The room went completely silent as the reel began to turn. Then, Elijah's voice. "If you find this, run. Don't listen. Don't watch." Dower records everything, even your thoughts. The tape burned out halfway through, smoke curling from the machine. Claire bolted from the station, chased by silence thick as fog. She looked back only once and saw the tower blinking with a new message in glowing letters. "Welcome, Claire. We've been waiting." As Claire ran from the radio station, the fog thickened into walls. Landmarks she'd memorized were now gone, replaced by unfamiliar streets and buildings that hadn't existed minutes before. The town was reshaping itself around her. At the edge of a cul-de-sac, she stopped. A house stood there. Large, blackwood siding, steep gables, glowing windows. It hadn't been there yesterday, she was sure of it. Yet it bore her family crest carved into the door. An exact match from a pendant her grandmother had passed down, now lost with Elijah. She stepped forward, unsure if she was being summoned or trapped. The porch light flickered as she approached, then turned solid green. The moment her hand touched the doorknob, the house breathed. The walls expanded and contracted slightly, like lungs. Inside, the layout was familiar, but impossible. It was a perfect replica of the house Claire and Elijah grew up in. Every detail was right. The wallpaper patterns, the chipped dining table corner, even the mark on the hallway wall where Elijah crashed his bike indoors. But something was wrong with the proportions. The hallways stretched farther than they should. Doors opened into rooms that shouldn't exist. A second-floor hallway led to a staircase that spiraled downward, infinitely. Claire descended, counting each step. At step 119, she began hearing voices. Not whispers, but full conversations, her own memories, playing out of sync, arguments with her parents, her first big story, Elijah's voice reading her one of his sci-fi comics. Each door she passed along the stairs had a peephole, and inside each one was a different version of her life. Some familiar, others foreign. One room showed her never leaving journalism, another never being born. At the 247th step, a door opened by itself. Inside was a study with walls covered in maps, all of Dower, each map labeled Observed Patterns, Claire Whitmore. She stepped inside, and the door slammed shut. On the desk was a book with a leather cover, no title. Inside, handwritten entries described her every move since arriving in town, down to the second. Every decision, every doubt, even thoughts she hadn't spoken aloud. The last page was blank until words began appearing in real time. Claire looks at the book. She feels it now. She understands. She knows she can't leave. The sentence ended just as she slammed the book shut. But it was too late. Behind her, the room began to rebuild. Walls folding, furniture rearranging. Dower was alive, and it was writing the next chapter. Claire escaped the shifting house through a second-story window that hadn't existed when she entered. The drop left her limping, but she pressed on, guided now by instinct more than logic. As she crossed through what resembled a dried-up town square, she saw a large stone building with an engraved plaque over its doors. Dower Public Library, knowledge preserved. She stepped inside, immediately assaulted by the smell of old paper and scorched wood. But nothing looked burned. The air was heavy, dense with silence. Thousands of books lined the walls, but their pages were blank. Every one. A single light flickered above a large reading table where an open book sat waiting. Claire approached, wary. This one wasn't blank. Its title, The Unwritten Ends. Inside were detailed accounts of people who had vanished throughout history, each connected by a place never officially recorded. Dower. A man lost in 1938, a girl who disappeared in 1955, a family erased in 1979. All traced back to the same coordinates she had found in Elijah's journal. Each entry ended the same way: observed, absorbed, forgotten. And in between the lines of text, small handwritten notes had been added, messages from the missing screaming in the margins. She flipped ahead and found Elijah's name, dated 12 years ago. The entry was longer than the others, and in the margins, the handwriting was unmistakably his. It begged her not to follow, begged her to forget. They let you stay. They never let you leave. They copy your thoughts, your memories, then they burn you. The book's text began to smudge as she read. Ink bled from the pages like veins, opening under pressure. Smoke curled up from the spine, yet there were no flames. Claire tried to close it, but the book held fast. Then, without warning, it burst into black smoke, and the shelves all around her screamed, not figuratively. The books themselves emitted human screams, shrill and desperate, thousands of voices howling in perfect agony. Claire stumbled back, covering her ears, but the sound came from inside her head. The lights overhead shattered one by one. Something was coming, down the aisle, its form indistinct, shifting like static wrapped in flesh. Claire ran, diving behind a fallen bookshelf. As the creature passed, it whispered her thoughts aloud, every secret, every guilt, every fear. "You should have stayed gone, Claire." It paused. "Now we'll write you into the walls, too." And just like that, it vanished, leaving behind only silence and a single, still-burning page with her name at the top. Claire escaped the library through a side window just before the building collapsed into itself, quietly, like paper folding. She didn't look back. Her ears were still ringing, her head heavy with voices that weren't hers. As she staggered down what used to be Main Street, she saw a figure standing under a broken street lamp, tall, perfectly still. His suit was clean, outdated, and his face was wrong. not obscured, not hidden, replaced. Where features should be, there was only shifting static, like a TV tuned to a dead channel. She stopped in her tracks. The man tilted his head slightly, as if trying to recognize her. He raised his hand, and suddenly Claire couldn't move. Her limbs locked. Her mouth refused to form words. He didn't speak, but his thoughts pressed into her skull like a needle through fabric. "You were not invited." Images flooded her mind. Her arrival, her childhood, her first nightmares, all watched, all catalogued. He took a step forward. The static on his face flickered faster, glitching with faces she recognized. Her parents, Elijah herself, but each one twisted, disjointed, like memories filtered through something inhuman. Her eyes filled with tears, not from fear, but from the overwhelming weight of being known. The static-faced man reached into his coat and pulled out a small black box. He set it on the ground. It opened like a blooming flower, revealing what looked like a camera lens. Record. Claire suddenly collapsed, free from his grip, gasping for air. The man turned and walked backward into the fog, vanishing. Claire stared at the box. It began blinking, a red light. Recording. Of what? Of her, or of the town through her eyes. She kicked it, but it didn't move. Instead, it multiplied. Dozens of identical boxes appeared across the street, on rooftops, inside windows, all pointing at her, all recording. Panicked, she ran, but every direction she turned, more cameras appeared, growing from the ground, sprouting from walls. In the center of town square, a giant screen powered on. It showed glare, live from every angle. She covered her face, screamed, but her voice was overpowered by another, her own, narrating everything she was doing. Claire runs, Claire hides, Claire realizes she was the story all along. She collapsed to the ground, defeated, but on the screen something changed. Another figure appeared, Elijah tied to a chair, mouthing one word over and over: "Don't broadcast." Claire knew now that 319 wasn't just a time, it was a ritual, a countdown, a convergence point. She began to see the pattern. Every person trapped in Dower had been drawn to it by memory, grief, or curiosity. Each one arrived at 3:19 p.m., and from that moment on, the town began to reshape itself around their worst fears. It wasn't random. It was structured. She returned to the square, where the screen had gone dark. In its place was a stone circle, old, moss-covered, glowing faintly from within. Symbols she didn't recognize pulsed across its surface, syncing with the heartbeat now thudding in her ears. She found a journal lying open on the ground nearby. Not hers, not Elijah's. A third voice. The entries detailed someone named Margaret Hale, who had vanished in 1952. Her final writings described a ceremony that took place every 19th day of the month at 3:19 p.m. when Dower opened itself. The town fed on emotion, especially guilt and memory. During the ritual, the participant would be offered one final choice: surrender a truth or be erased completely. Claire looked around. The fog was thicker. The lights dimmed. It was nearly time. The town was preparing itself, and she was the next subject. Bells began to ring, not one, but many, from buildings that had no towers, no steeples. They rang in disharmony, shaking the ground, vibrating Claire's ribs. Figures emerged from the mist, hooded, faceless, silent. They formed a circle around her. The stone ring at the center began to spin slowly. Claire was frozen again, by fear or by design, she couldn't tell. One of the figures stepped forward and held out a mirror. In it, she saw herself, bleeding, crying, but not from now, from before. The night Elijah disappeared, a memory she had buried deep. She had convinced him to go, dared him, laughed when he hesitated. The mirror cracked. A voice echoed around the square, "Speak your truth." Claire's throat burned. She tried to stay silent, to resist. But the pressure built until it became pain. Speak or forget. She fell to her knees, and then she said it. It was my fault. I pushed him. I sent him into the woods. I thought it was a joke. The figures stepped back. The stone ring stopped spinning. The fog parted. And for the first time, she saw Elijah, whole, alive, standing just beyond the circle. But he looked wrong, stiff, still. He smiled but didn't blink. Then the voice whispered one final line. Now we remember you both. When Claire opened her eyes, she was inside a room she didn't recognize. Round, windowless, seamless. There were no shadows, no corners, no doors. The walls were made of something smooth and dark, like obsidian, but pulsing faintly with a dim inner light. She had no memory of how she got here, only that the ritual had ended, and Elijah had smiled. Her voice was gone. Her throat felt scorched, as if truth itself had been torn out of her. She stood slowly, unsure of her own weight. The air in the room wasn't air at all. It was dense, like breathing memory. Every inhale brought a different scent from her past. Pine, smoke, blood, her mother's perfume. In the center of the room stood a single chair. She approached cautiously. It was familiar, identical to the one in her childhood bedroom. On the seat rested a cassette recorder. Old, analog, no buttons, no tape, just one message scratched into the side. Press play. She hesitated. The recorder buzzed with warmth. Finally, she touched it. No sound came. Then the room itself began to play. The walls shimmered like disturbed water, revealing scenes from her life. But they were wrong, twisted. In one, Elijah was alive, but hated her. In another, she never searched for him and lived a happy, empty life. None of them felt real. The voice returned, not in sound, but in her mind. These are the lives you traded. The images began to shift faster, overlapping, as if fighting for dominance. Claire clutched her head, screaming silently. Then the walls froze on a single image. Her own body, lifeless, lying in the woods, clutching Elijah's necklace. A shadow stood over her, the static-faced man. He wasn't killing her. He was copying her, uploading her memory into the town. This is your real end, the voice said. Dower doesn't kill, it collects. Every scream, every sin, every secret. The floor beneath her shimmered, turning translucent. Beneath the glass, she saw hundreds, no thousands of people, trapped in similar rooms, faces twisted in agony or bliss, some asleep, some screaming, all pulsing with that same dim light. She realized Dower wasn't a place. It was a system, a living archive. The town was a mechanism, feeding, storing, erasing, and her chapter was nearly complete. The chair behind her creaked. She turned and found Elijah sitting in it. He looked up, eyes glassy. "It's not over," he whispered. "It never ends." Then the light in the room began to pulse in sync with her heartbeat. Faster, louder, and everything started to collapse inward. Claire jolted awake on a cold forest floor. Morning light filtered through tall, unfamiliar trees. Her clothes were torn, her recorder shattered beside her. The hum was gone, birds chirped, wind moved. It felt real, too real. She staggered to her feet, disoriented, clutching Elijah's necklace still somehow around her neck. In the distance, she saw her jeep, untouched, parked near the gravel road where the strange pavement had first appeared. Her phone had service. One missed call from Josh, a voicemail. "Claire, it's been 3 days. Are you okay? Call me." She checked the date. 3 days had passed. She was back. Everything seemed normal, almost. But the trees were too still, the light didn't shift. And when she looked at her phone screen's reflection, something felt off. Her eyes didn't blink. She tested it, stared at herself. Nothing, no blink. A chill ran down her spine. She ran to the Jeep and drove straight toward the highway, heart racing. She passed the same gas station from before. The same man was there, same posture, same pale stare. He looked at her and said nothing, just slowly lifted his hand and pointed back toward the woods. She ignored him. She was done. She was out. She reached the highway and kept going. The city returned like a dream she'd forgotten. Her apartment was dusty, but exactly how she left it. She showered, ate, slept, but she couldn't shake the feeling. Something followed her. Her reflection still wouldn't blink. Her shadow sometimes moved when she didn't. Every night at 3:19 a.m., her lights flickered and the hum returned, just for a second. She contacted Josh, begged him to meet. When he arrived, his jaw dropped. "Claire, you've been gone for 3 months." She tried to protest, show her call logs, but her phone reset in her hand. Blank, fresh, like it had never existed before that day. Later that night, Claire decided to check her old hard drives. Every folder was corrupted, except one she didn't remember creating. It was labeled Return. Inside were hours of footage of her walking through Dower, speaking things she never remembered saying. And the final video, shot from her own camera, was of her asleep in bed. The timestamp? Tomorrow night. She shut the laptop, but the screen flickered back on, displaying one line: "We never let go. You just blinked." She ran to her mirror. Her reflection finally blinked, but she didn't, and in that moment, she understood. There is no exit, only the illusion of leaving. Claire began experiencing vivid flashes, visions that hit her like lightning bolts. One moment, she was brushing her teeth. The next, she was in a hospital hallway, holding the hand of a crying woman she didn't know. Names, smells, voices filled her mind. Memories so detailed, they had to be real. But they weren't hers. She never met these people, never lived these moments. Yet she felt the weight of every emotion. Her thoughts were becoming a cluttered gallery of borrowed lives. She started writing them down, trying to separate what was hers from what wasn't. The lines blurred quickly. Her handwriting changed mid-sentence. She woke up one night on the floor of her living room, covered in pages she didn't remember writing. Each one told the life story of someone else, always ending at 3:19. A nurse who vanished in 1966, a soldier from 1944, a man who drowned in his bathtub in 2007, though no water was ever found. And always, in the margins, the words, observed, absorbed. Claire realized Dower was still inside her. Not metaphorically, literally. It had implanted something, some mechanism, some system that continued to record and overwrite. She was becoming an archive, not a person, a vessel. Her face began to change in the mirror. Subtle things. A mole she didn't have before, a scar she never earned. One day, she blinked and saw someone else blink back. She screamed, smashing the mirror, but in the shards, dozens of other faces stared up at her, some crying, some smiling, some watching. Elijah's face appeared among them, not pleading, not afraid, just present. And behind him, the static-faced man, slowly nodding. Claire collapsed, whispering to herself, "I'm not me, I'm not me." The lights flickered again. Her body felt heavier, her mind crowded. No more space left. Then came the knock at the door. Soft, repetitive, mechanical. She knew who it was before she looked. A woman in her 60s, trembling, holding a crumpled letter. "This came for you," the woman said. Claire took the envelope, hands shaking. Inside, a single sheet of paper. The same handwriting as before. "Don't go back there, not even to remember." Only this time, the return address was hers. She turned to ask the woman a question, but the woman was gone. Her hallway was gone. Her apartment replaced by dark, pulsing walls. Claire didn't leave Dower. She brought it with her, and now it was spreading. Claire began noticing subtle changes in the people around her. Co-workers paused mid-conversation, eyes glazed for a second too long. Strangers on the street turned their heads in perfect unison as she passed. One evening at a cafe, a child looked up from their juice box and whispered, "You're the one who came back." Claire leaned in, heart racing. "What did you say?" But the child blinked twice and asked their mother for more napkins. As Claire left, she saw her own face on the cafe's television, only for a second. Then the screen glitched back to weather. It wasn't just her. Others could feel it. And worse, some remembered her. She searched online, deep into the forums, beyond the normal. Web. Keywords like Dower effect, Lost Looptown, and 319 phenomenon surfaced in encrypted threads. Others had reported similar experiences, flashes of memories that weren't theirs, voices whispering through electrical hums, clocks that froze at 3:19. One user, codenamed Stonebell, posted a chilling phrase, "Dower is a broadcast, and you're all antennas." Claire messaged him, begging for details. He replied instantly, "Too late to block it, just don't amplify it." Attached was an audio file labeled, "Warning, do not listen." She listened. It wasn't a voice, not exactly. It was a layered sound, like radio static laced with whispering tones and fragments of familiar laughter. Her own, Elijah's, her mother's lullaby. Within 5 seconds, her lights flickered. The power in her building died. Her laptop burst into a loop, cycling through photos of her life, real and imagined. The last image froze. Claire standing in the middle of a foggy street, holding the cassette recorder from an house that rebuilt itself. She hadn't taken that photo, but she remembered standing there. The timestamp read 3:19. But the date? 1 week from now. Stonebell's profile vanished. The forum went offline, but the damage was done. Claire began hearing voices in her sleep. Not dreams, but transmissions. They carried instructions, coordinates, and warnings. She traced one to a storage unit on the city's outskirts. Inside were boxes labeled with names and dates, none of which were hers. Yet all the belongings inside were things she recognized. A stuffed animal she'd lost at age 6, her father's old watch, Elijah's journal. As she held it, a phrase burned itself across the pages in black ink. "They remember too, and they're coming back through you." It started at exactly 3:19 p.m. again. Claire was walking through the city when the sunlight suddenly reversed. Not dimmed, reversed. Shadows flowed backward across the pavement. Cars froze in motion. A flock of birds above her stopped, mid-flight, suspended like marionettes. The clouds twisted counterclockwise. People kept walking, some unaware, some flickering, their faces momentarily replaced by static, just like the man in Dower. Claire dropped to her knees, staring up at a sky that was no longer blue but grey and pulsing, as if the atmosphere itself was on a loop. Time wasn't moving forward anymore. It was rewinding. Claire's phone buzzed, without power. A notification appeared. Recording resumed. Her own voice whispered. From the speaker, "Observe, don't interfere. Observe." She looked around and saw others frozen in place, their mouths open mid-sentence. A man across the street mouthed the word "help," but made no sound. Claire ran, but every step echoed louder than it should have, then duplicated. Her footsteps replayed behind her, slightly out of sync, as if something was retracing her path in real time. At one intersection, she saw herself running the opposite direction. Same clothes, same face, but smiling. The city began to melt, not in flames, but in memory. Buildings shifted into places from Claire's past. Her childhood school replaced a bank. Her parents' house emerged in the middle of a parking lot. People transformed into versions of people she had known, teachers, neighbors, even characters from old dreams. Claire stumbled into an alley and found the clock tower from Dower, impossibly transported. It was intact, its hands spinning backward violently. A bell rang once, and everything stopped. The silence was absolute. Then a deep voice, not human, filled the air. "You were never meant to leave the loop." Claire turned. The static-faced man stood behind her. But now his face flickered through thousands of identities per second. Elijah, herself, strangers, monsters. "The town is awake," he said, "and now so is the sky." He raised a hand, and the ground beneath Claire's feet shattered. She fell, not down, but upward, through layers of light and memory. As she ascended, she passed versions of herself trapped in mirrors, windows, cameras, watching. And then she saw something terrifying. Millions of other people suspended mid-moment, mid-thought, each caught in their own rewinding world. She wasn't alone. Dower was bigger than she ever imagined. Claire hit the ground hard, but there was no impact, no pain, no sound, nothing. She opened her eyes and found herself in a version of the world that looked identical, but felt completely hollow. The colors were muted, the sky a static gray, and worst of all, no sound existed, not her heartbeat, not her breathing, not the wind. She screamed, but heard only silence. It wasn't just that she couldn't hear, there was nothing to hear. She wandered through this voiceless copy of reality, passing people frozen mid-stride, mouths open, forever paused in invisible conversations. A family sat at a dinner table, unmoving, their food untouched and steaming. Everywhere she turned, the same phrase appeared, carved into sidewalks, etched on car, doors, burned into tree bark. "This is what forgetting sounds like." Claire's thoughts started echoing inside her skull. Too loud. Her memories blurred, faces merged, years rearranged. She tried writing her name into the dirt, and for the first time, she forgot the last letter. The silence was eating her from the inside out. Her fingers trembled. She couldn't remember what Elijah's laugh sounded like, her father's voice, even her own. She slammed her fists against a shop window, and the glass cracked silently. But behind it, her reflection mouthed a word: "Run." She followed the cracks through the town to the library again. But here, it was infinite. Endless shelves stretched in every direction, each book sealed shut with black wax. A sign above the entrance read, "Words are dangerous here." She moved deeper until she found a book glowing faintly in red. It was labeled "The Last Sentence." Claire opened it, and every page was blank except the final one, where a line of text was being written in real time. She opens the book. She realizes the silence is the final form of memory. She screams, and the sentence stopped. Claire dropped the book, but the silence roared inside her head like an avalanche. That's when she saw them again, the others, figures from past loops. Some had faces, some didn't. All of them walked without sound, their feet never touching the ground. They moved toward her slowly, raising their hands, not to harm her, but to point. Behind her, a mirror shimmered into view. Claire turned. Inside it was sound. She could hear her own heartbeat, her breath, a voice, Elijah's, calling her name. The mirror pulsed. It was a portal, a choice: stay in the silent world or dive back into the noise. She stepped forward, tears falling silently from her face, and as she touched the glass, everything shattered. Claire gasped as sound returned in an overwhelming wave. Sirens, traffic, voices, the pounding of her own pulse. She was back in her apartment. At least it looked like it. The mirror had shattered behind her. Her phone buzzed on the table. 3:19 p.m. A knock at the door. Not again. Slowly, she opened it. No one was there. But an envelope lay on the floor, identical to the first. Inside, a photograph of Dower, dated today. The caption read, "Welcome home." Claire dropped it. Her breathing quickened. She turned on the TV. Every channel showed the same static, the same face, hers. Claire tried to leave the apartment, but every exit led her back. Inside, the stairwell reset. The elevator doors opened to her own hallway. The windows showed streets she'd never seen. Her laptop rebooted with a message she couldn't delete. Now recording. Episode 1. The camera light was on. She hadn't turned it on. From her speakers, Elijah's voice played on loop. You found me. Now you'll find yourself. Claire stood still, trembling. She was being watched, broadcasted, but not just by Dower, by everyone who had ever heard the story, everyone who had ever seen her. And that's when it clicked. The story was the trap. The moment you hear about Dower, it begins to observe you. The moment you listen, read, speak the name, it finds you. Every person watching, every person listening becomes a thread. Claire was just the latest narrator, not the final. Her memories, her fear, her journey, they weren't hers anymore. They belonged to Dower. The town wasn't a place. It was a signal, a narrative virus disguised as a haunting. The more she fought it, the more it spread. She looked into the lens and whispered what she finally understood. You're already in it. So now you know. Now you've heard the name. Now you've seen the path. Maybe you think this is just fiction. Maybe you're telling yourself you'll forget it by tomorrow. But check your clocks. Look for that hum in the silence. Watch the corners of your mirrors. If, someday soon, you wake up in a town that doesn't appear on any map, don't follow the road. Don't answer the door. And whatever happens, never speak the name. Because Dower doesn't stop when the story ends. It begins when someone new presses play.